Death in the Middle Ages was such a common occurrence that people viewed it as an inevitable companion. Epidemics, constant wars, and the complete absence of antibiotics made life expectancy alarmingly short. Modern medicine has pushed this fear into the background, turning death into something distant and abstract. However, 1,000 years ago, there were things that terrified people far more than a simple physical cardiac arrest. Surprisingly, modern psychologists and sociologists fully confirm the validity of this ancient fear. Social isolation and the destruction of one's status devastate the human psyche just as effectively as a serious illness destroys the body. Ancient people understood this concept perfectly well without any academic degrees, laboratories, or large-scale studies. But here's what's truly striking when you begin to examine their strict system of everyday fears in detail. In the Middle Ages, the most dreaded punishment was not the execution block, but an order to leave one's native village forever. The condemned person would gather their meager belongings and flee into the forest, severing all ties with civilization. Today, moving to another city means new career opportunities, a change of scenery, and personal growth. In the 13th century, it meant a guaranteed death sentence with an agonizing delay of a couple of weeks. But this is where things get most interesting from a modern perspective. Why was a simple walk beyond the safety of a settlement so fatal for a physically healthy person? Because the medieval world beyond the sturdy walls of a village was literally a hostile and deadly environment. There were no cozy inns, regular road patrols, or 24-hour supermarkets along the highway. A lone traveler in the forest instantly became easy prey for hungry wild animals and ruthless bandits. The dense forests were teeming with aggressive people who had already been cast out and banded together into vicious gangs. Modern tourists bring high-tech tents and high-calorie protein bars to survive in the wild. A medieval outcast carried only a faint hope, which rapidly faded with each cold day. Surviving alone required enormous energy and impeccable, almost athletic health. Just to keep warm on a silent night, one had to spend long hours gathering firewood. Modern sports medicine confirms that a person's basic caloric needs double during severe hypothermia. The outcast burned through his internal reserves much faster than he could find new food in the winter forest. But that was not the worst part of the ruthless process of medieval exile. The main problem was that neighboring fortified villages flatly refused to take in unknown strangers. Any stranger was logically perceived as a potentially dangerous criminal or a hidden carrier of a deadly contagious disease. Heavy wooden doors were simply shut, and the person was left standing in the freezing, pouring rain. Ordinary people understood this brutal math of survival instinctively from their earliest barefoot childhood. That is precisely why the fear of losing one's rightful place in the community controlled social behavior better than any written laws. A person could meekly endure severe beatings, daily humiliations, and extreme poverty, just to remain within the protective walls. Exile permanently shattered this fragile barrier between a life of understanding and the pitch-black darkness of the forest. Modern anthropologists have proven that complete social isolation triggers the same processes in the brain as actual physical pain. Ancient rulers knew nothing of complex neurobiology, but they clearly saw the practical results in their subjects. They masterfully used exile as an ideal and inexpensive tool for controlling large, illiterate masses of people. Why spend money maintaining stone prisons when you could simply banish an undesirable person beyond a high fence? It sounds extremely cruel, but this social system operated with flawless, blood-curdling efficiency for many hundreds of years. The modern penitentiary system spends enormous amounts of public funds on the humane detention of prisoners in heated cells. Medieval feudal lords simply struck a person from the list of the living and closed the iron gates forever. But here's what is truly striking about this historical, multi-layered system of fears and punishments. The loss of a physical home was merely the very first step into a bottomless social abyss. There were forces that destroyed a person's identity even before the unfortunate soul physically left their hometown. The fear of losing not just a thatched roof over one's head, but the very essence of one's existence haunted every citizen. And this logically leads us to the next, no less terrifying concept of the harsh medieval world.
This dispute threatens the survival of your families.
But the harvest
For a
comes
medieval
at that
person,
field, sir.
the concept of personal honor was not just a pretty word from chivalric romances. Honor was a very tangible form of social capital that literally determined a family's chances of mere physical survival. Today, a tarnished business reputation might cost a businessman a lucrative contract or a seat on the board of directors. In the 14th century, losing one's good name meant that no one would ever sell you bread at the market again. People depended on the trust of their neighbors in every minute detail of their difficult daily lives. There were no credit histories, bank ratings, or official letters of recommendation from past employers. The only guarantee that a person would repay a debt or complete a job was their word of honor. As soon as that word lost its value, the entire system of livelihood surrounding the outcast instantly collapsed. Imagine a world where every misstep you take becomes known to absolutely everyone in the city before sunset. On modern social media, scandals flare up brightly but are safely forgotten by users after a couple of days. Medieval collective memory functioned like a reliable hard drive that never erased anything. A grandfather's mistake could be recalled by his grandson 50 years later during the conclusion of an important trade deal. Modern public relations specialists call this a personal brand crisis. Medieval peasants and artisans called this social death, which was worse than a stab with a rusty dagger. If an artisan was caught using substandard materials, the guild did not simply fine him for breaking the rules. He was stripped of his right to practice his trade, condemning his entire large family to rapid destitution. Economists today know full well that trust is the primary currency of any successful civilized society. Surprisingly, illiterate medieval merchants intuitively built the entire economy of vast Europe on this principle. The loss of honor meant automatic exclusion from this complex, invisible web of mutual obligations and support. A person remained physically alive, but socially he became an invisible ghost on the streets of his hometown. This is precisely why men and women were prepared to defend their honor with terrifying cruelty and determination. Duels and bloody battles of honor did not arise from excessive pride or an abundance of free time. It was the only available way to publicly prove to the community one's reliability and the right to remain part of society. Today we file lawsuits for defamation, but back then people took up heavy swords. There were even special legal procedures for restoring a lost good name through the vouching of neighbors. A dozen respected citizens had to publicly swear on holy relics to the accused's innocence. This worked as a medieval equivalent of modern collective surety when obtaining a large bank loan. If no one was willing to risk their soul, the person was found guilty with all the ensuing consequences.
Our hands are joined.
But there is another cruel detail hidden in this merciless historical system of social ranking. Shame always fell not only on the guilty party himself, but also on his entire extended family. The children of a dishonorable man lost their chances of a successful marriage or admission into a respected professional craft guild. Modern lawyers would call this collective punishment, a violation of all basic human rights. In those days, this was considered an entirely normal mechanism of self-defense for the fragile medieval society against potential offenders. The fear of endangering one's children was more powerful than any official threats from the city guard. This made people think twice before committing a dishonorable act or deceiving a partner. But what happened when a secret sin nevertheless became known to the entire harsh community? That is when the machinery of public justice stepped in, a system that knew no mercy and had no concept of modern notions of humanity. Society had to not only punish the guilty party, but also teach a visual lesson to all the other residents. The destruction of honor had to be physically cemented so that no one would ever doubt the offender's status. And this brings us to one of the most spectacular and gruesome aspects of that time. In the Middle Ages, punishment without an audience was considered a pointless waste of precious time and government administrative resources. The town square regularly turned into a bloody theater where justice was meant to be loud and visible. The most terrifying aspect of public punishment was not the physical pain of the lashes or the branding. The real horror was that very moment when a person stood chained to the pillory in front of their neighbors. Rotten vegetables, stones, and insults flew at them from people with whom they had shared bread just yesterday. Today, victims of online bullying can simply delete their accounts and turn off their smartphones to protect their mental health. There were dozens of sophisticated instruments designed specifically to maximize public humiliation rather than to inflict physical injury. Masks of shame, wooden stocks, and the gossip's violin all were constructed with cynical engineering precision. Modern engineers designed ergonomic office chairs to reduce strain on the worker's spine. Medieval craftsmen created stocks so that a person would experience maximum discomfort and look as pitiful as possible. Interestingly, the degree of humiliation was strictly graded depending on the crime committed and the status of the guilty party. A baker who sold underweight bread could be put in a cage and dipped into a dirty city puddle. It sounds like a silly joke from a comedy movie, but for the baker, it meant the complete ruin of his business. No one in their right mind would buy baked goods from a man who had been doused in manure the day before. The attitude toward women's transgressions, which threatened the traditional patriarchal order of society, was particularly cruel. Women caught in scandals or slander were forced to wear the so-called slanderer's bridle through the city streets. An iron device with a sharp spike for the tongue physically prevented the victim from uttering a single word in her defense. It was a cruel but effective attempt by medieval society to literally silence any social unrest. Branding with a red-hot iron elevated public shame to a completely new, irreversible level of social ruin. A letter seared onto the forehead or cheek forever turned a person into a walking advertisement for their own crime. Modern facial tattoos are often done for self-expression or to attract attention in the fashion industry. In those days, it was a criminal's permanent ID that could not be lost or forged. A branded person was automatically deprived of the opportunity to start a new life in another city or hide their past. Any guard at the city gates could immediately see that they were facing a thief, a perjurer, or a runaway serf. This forced the branded people into hiding, swelling the ranks of professional bandits and forest robbers. The system, designed to protect society, itself generated perpetual outcasts who had nothing to lose. Secular power could ruin your earthly life, seize your property, and turn you into a laughingstock in the town square. But spiritual power possessed a weapon that made even the most powerful kings of Europe tremble with animal terror. When the church decided to apply its ultimate punishment, a person lost all hope of salvation in eternity. And this threat was absolutely real for every believing mind in that dark historical period. To understand the horror of excommunication, one must grasp the role of religion in the life of the average medieval citizen. The church was not merely a building where people came on Sundays to listen to a boring, moralizing sermon. It held an absolute monopoly on truth, was the sole provider of education, and served as the primary recorder of all life events. A modern person could easily live their entire life without ever setting foot inside a religious institution. In the Middle Ages, every step from birth to the grave was strictly controlled and sanctified by representatives of the clergy. Excommunication meant immediate disconnection from this vital spiritual and social infrastructure. An excommunicated person could not baptize their children, get married, receive communion, or obtain absolution before death. In terms of the modern world, this is akin to having one's passport, bank accounts, and health insurance all blocked simultaneously. But the spiritual consequences terrified people far more than social inconveniences or legal restrictions. Medieval people sincerely, without the slightest doubt, believed in the literal existence of a blazing hell and horned demons. Excommunication meant a 100% guaranteed ticket to the underworld for eternal, indescribable torment after physical death. No modern horror movie can compare to the images of hell that preachers painted in the minds of their congregations. There was an even more sweeping instrument of ecclesiastical pressure, known as an interdict, which affected entire territories. It was a kind of mass excommunication, where religious services were suspended for an entire city or kingdom. Churches were closed, bells fell silent, and the dead had to be buried in unconsecrated ground without prayer. It was a brilliant political lever, forcing the population to pressure their rebellious rulers from below. Modern political scientists would call an interdict harsh economic sanctions that target the civilian population in order to bring about regime change. The only difference is that, instead of a shortage of imported goods, people experienced a shortage of divine grace. The panic that gripped a town under an interdict often led to mass riots and the immediate surrender of local authorities. No army could hold back a crowd convinced that, because of the mayor's stubbornness, they would all go to hell. From a psychological standpoint, excommunication played on the deepest human fear, the fear of ultimate rejection. Being banished from the village was terrifying, but there remained hope for God's mercy in the afterlife. Excommunication took away that last straw, leaving a person alone with absolute cosmic emptiness and despair. It was the perfect weapon of intimidation, requiring not a single drop of blood to be shed for its use. But despite all the horror of spiritual damnation, there was an enemy who was more tangible and closer than any demon. This enemy required no papal bulls, paid no heed to social status, and came without warning every winter. It slowly sucked the life out of entire regions, turning decent Christians into animals driven mad by despair. And this tangible, physical fear haunted every person from the moment they woke up until they fell into a heavy sleep. We have grown accustomed to fearing sudden death from an accident, a heart attack, or a rapidly spreading incurable infection. In modern, developed society, hunger is perceived as a mere annoyance an hour before the lunch break at the office. In the Middle Ages, mass starvation was a regular, systemic phenomenon that methodically decimated the population with frightening consistency. The fear of crop failure was woven into the genetic code of every farmer, dictating all their daily decisions. People tried to trick their empty stomachs with the most incredible and desperate methods available in nature. They mixed tree bark, acorns, straw, and even ordinary clay into their flour to create the illusion of fullness. Modern nutritionists would be horrified by such an extreme diet, which would destroy the digestive tract in a matter of weeks. But when the choice is between death today or tomorrow, the stomach is ready to digest even old leather belts. A particularly terrifying aspect of medieval famine was its absolute mathematical inevitability in the event of a climatic anomaly. If the summer was too rainy and the harvest rotted in the fields, winter automatically turned into a mass grave. There were no global supply chains, humanitarian organizations, or government reserve funds to save the population. Isolated regions were forced to cope with the disaster on their own, relying solely on their meager supplies in the granaries. The economy of that time was so fragile that a single bad year set the region's development back by decades. During shortages, grain prices skyrocketed tenfold, making bread unaffordable for the vast majority of city dwellers. Modern financial crises with inflation seem like a minor inconvenience compared to a market where a loaf of bread costs as much as a house. People sold their property, clothing, and even their freedom into voluntary slavery for a sack of moldy wheat. Famine destroyed not only human bodies, but also the very fabric of social morality and Christian ethics. Mothers abandoned their children at the gates of monasteries, realizing they would be unable to feed them through the winter. In the darkest chronicles, there are credible accounts of cannibalism when despair erased all human traits. Civilization vanished in a matter of months, leaving behind only the basic animalistic instinct of self-preservation at any cost. The Great Famine of the 14th century demonstrated that even the most developed states of Europe were utterly powerless against nature. Constant torrential rains destroyed crops, and millions of people perished on the streets of wealthy trading cities. Modern climatologists call this the Little Ice Age. Studied through temperature and precipitation charts, to the people of that time, it looked like the literal onset of a biblical apocalypse with no chance of salvation. This constant fear of starvation shaped a unique attitude toward food that now seems wild to us. The aristocracy's festive feast with mountains of roasted meat were not merely a display of vulgar gluttony. They were a demonstration of absolute power over humanity's greatest fear, the ability to provide oneself with an endless supply of calories. A corpulent person was considered beautiful and successful because their weight physically proved victory over hunger. But even if the granaries were bursting with grain and the cellars were full of wine, a person could not feel safe. There were threats from which neither the thick stone walls of a castle nor gold coins could protect. The body might be well fed, but it remained defenseless against invisible enemies that turned life into a ceaseless torment. And the most terrifying of these were the diseases that slowly eroded the human form, leaving behind nothing but a living corpse. Medicine in the Middle Ages was a mixture of ancient superstitions, herbalism, and a sincere belief in divine intervention. When a serious infection entered the body, the doctor would most often simply throw up his hands and recommend bloodletting. But what people feared most were not the swift and deadly epidemics like the famous plague, which killed in 3 days. The real bone-chilling horror was caused by chronic diseases that slowly and inexorably disfigured the human body. Leprosy was the undisputed king of medieval nightmares, the living embodiment of hell on earth. This bacterial infection spent years destroying nerve endings, cartilage, and tissue, turning a person's face into a ghastly mask. Modern medicine successfully treats leprosy with a course of antibiotics, and the disease has virtually disappeared from developed countries. In the Middle Ages, a diagnosis of leprosy was worse than a death sentence, as it socially killed a person while they were still alive. The procedure for declaring a person a leper was fraught with frightening, almost theatrical cruelty and symbolism. A priest would officially read a funeral mass over the living patient, symbolically sprinkling his head with grave soil. From that moment on, the patient was considered legally and socially dead to the rest of the normal world. He lost the right to inheritance, property, and marriage, becoming an eternal outcast with no hope of return. Leprosy patients were forced to wear special, closed clothing and constantly ring a wooden bell as they walked. This sound warned healthy people of approaching danger, causing them to panic and cross to the other side of the street. Modern social distancing measures during pandemics are based on a similar, albeit more humane, logic. But in those days, the bell was a mark of eternal loneliness, ringing until the very last breath of the sick person. But leprosy was not the only physical nightmare of that era that destroyed a person's appearance. Outbreaks of ergotism, caused by ergot in contaminated grain, led to excruciating pain and gangrene of the limbs. People called it St. Anthony's fire because the limbs turned black and fell off, as if burned by an invisible flame. Modern toxicologists understand the mechanism of this fungus, but back then it was perceived as a direct demonic intervention. The lack of basic hygiene and understanding of antiseptics turned any minor scratch into a potentially deadly threat. Smallpox left deep, disfiguring scars on the faces of survivors, permanently ruining their chances of a normal social life. Skin diseases that today are treated with a simple cream from the pharmacy tormented people for years, causing them to be shunned by those around them. Physical deformity was often equated with moral decay, making the sick person the target of ridicule and persecution. Disfiguring diseases were frightening precisely because they led to the loss of human appearance, the erasure of individuality and normality. A person with a disfigured face lost the ability to convey emotions, becoming a terrifying monster in the eyes of neighbors. This fear of losing one's body piece by piece haunted every night, artisan, and common peasant without exception. But even while maintaining physical health, a person could lose in an instant what made them someone of importance. The status system in the Middle Ages was as rigid as steel, but a fall from the top of the social ladder happened rapidly. And the consequences of this fall terrified the elite far more than the possibility of falling ill or dying in war. In the Middle Ages, your social status was your skin, and it could only be stripped away with blood. A person was born into a certain class and was bound to die in it, subject to strict unspoken rules. For the nobility, the loss of status was a catastrophe comparable to the collapse of their entire world. A ruined knight, forced to sell his warhorse and armor, became the object of ridicule and pitiful contempt. He could not simply go to work as a blacksmith or merchant, since manual labor was considered deeply humiliating. It is hard for a modern top executive to imagine the pride that would make a man starve rather than pick up a shovel. These rules were strictly enforced by so-called sumptuary laws, which dictated the appearance of each social class. A peasant had no right to wear silk or certain colors, even if he suddenly found a treasure trove of gold. The fate of widows was particularly tragic, as they instantly lost the protection and status of their late, influential husbands. A woman of noble blood without a male guardian often fell victim to greedy relatives claiming her lands. In modern times, prenuptial agreements and inheritance laws protect a widow's financial interests in court. In those harsh centuries, the court consisted of the very men who sought to strip her of her lawful property. The loss of status was often accompanied by the deprivation of basic legal rights, turning the former lord into a defenseless target. A person outside their social class fell out of the complex system of vassalage oaths and mutual military protection. It was like resetting all security settings in an operating system before a virus attack. Any neighbor with a small army could, with impunity, seize the remaining lands from someone no longer backed by a suzerain. But the fall in the social hierarchy frightened not only proud aristocrats with their ancestral coats of arms and castles. Artisans feared expulsion from their closed guilds more than a fire in their own workshop. A master craftsman, demoted to the status of a mere apprentice for his mistakes, lost the right to sell goods in his own name. He became a dependent laborer in a system where, just yesterday, he had set his own prices in the marketplace. Being turned into an outcast within one's own city shattered the human psyche more effectively than any medieval rack. Seeing former friends stop greeting you and servants, refuse to follow orders, was unbearable. Sociologists call this acute social deprivation, which often leads to severe depression and suicide. In a world without psychotherapists, people simply went quietly mad in their cold, empty rooms. And here we come to a state that combines exile, illness, and the loss of any status into a single knot. A state where a person is left alone with their thoughts in an absolute, echoing vacuum. For the modern city dweller, solitude often seems a welcome luxury after a hard week of work. To the medieval mind, total loneliness was a curse of a deeply mystical nature.
Let my tears reach you in heaven.
In our busy modern lives, we rarely think about who will remember us 100 long years from now. We leave behind social media profiles, digital photos, and terabytes of video on hard drives. For a person of the Middle Ages, the prospect of vanishing without a trace from the memory of posterity was tantamount to a second, final annihilation. To be forgotten meant that your existence on earth had lost absolutely all meaning and significance. This concept was closely tied to the belief in purgatory, where souls awaited their final heavenly fate. The duration of suffering in purgatory depended directly on how often living relatives prayed for the deceased. If your name was forgotten, the prayers ceased, and the soul remained stuck in a painful limbo for many millennia. In modern terms, this is like a subscription to a cloud service that shuts down as soon as the money runs out. It was precisely this primal fear of oblivion that gave rise to the grandiose medieval architecture and magnificent Gothic art. Wealthy lords built colossal cathedrals and founded monasteries not only out of piety or a desire to flaunt their wealth. They included a condition. The monks were obligated to pray eternally for the founder's soul, naming him by his specific name. It was a way to buy immortality in people's memories for a clinking, heavy gold coin. Those who could not afford an entire stone cathedral commissioned massive tombstones with their names carved upon them. Master stonemasons amassed enormous fortunes by carving intricate epitaphs and coats of arms onto marble tombstones. Today, we invest our savings in the stock market or real estate to ensure a comfortable, secure retirement. People of the past invested in cold stone to ensure the safety of their eternal afterlife. Even poor peasants gave their last copper coins to have their names recorded in special church memorial books. The priest would read these lists aloud during Sunday services, keeping a tenuous thread of memory alive in the minds of the community. The destruction of such a book during a fire or war was considered a tragedy of monumental, apocalyptic proportions. Entire generations of people were instantly erased from history, losing all hope of the saving prayers of their descendants. The ultimate manifestation of this fear was the punishment of damnatio memoriae, the official banishment of a criminal or traitor from memory. The guilty party's name was struck from all chronicles, chiseled off monuments, and strictly forbidden to be spoken aloud on pain of death. In an era without the internet or databases, this truly meant the complete erasure of a person from reality. They did not merely die physically, they ceased to exist in the past, present, and future. This existential dread of the void proves that human psychology has changed little over the past 1,000 years. We still strive to leave a mark on history, whether through a written book or a major business venture. Medieval people simply cloaked this basic instinct in a strict religious framework and a system of rigid rules. They understood that a person is alive as long as their name is spoken by the living. By studying these ancient fears, we begin to better understand the true nature of survival in those harsh, dark times. It was not merely a physical struggle against hunger, disease, and the sharp swords of neighboring aggressive lords. It was a constant, exhausting struggle to maintain one's place within a complex web of social and spiritual connections. And in this brutal struggle, defeat meant a fate that made ordinary death seem like a merciful escape. To modern people, the system of medieval fears seems like a collection of irrational superstitions and strange social constructs. We look at them from the vantage point of technological progress, proud of our insurance, medicine, and human rights. However, if we look more closely, beneath the layer of religious mysticism lies an incredibly pragmatic system of collective survival. The society of that time simply had no other tools to maintain order on the brink of a constant historical abyss. The fear of being cast out forced people to stick together in conditions where solitude meant certain physical death. The terror of losing one's honor served as a substitute for the complex modern system of contracts, bank guarantees, and bailiffs. Fear of punishment in the afterlife kept violence in check better than a small and ineffective urban armed guard. Ancient rulers ingeniously exploited these psychological levers, turning primal fears into the foundation of European civilization. Today we fear economic crises, global warming, and losing a stable cell phone signal on the highway. Our nightmares have become technological, but their root remains the same fear of losing control over our lives. By studying the horrors of the Middle Ages, we see not just dark pages of history, but a mirror of human nature. People will always fear what destroys their world. It's just that in every era, this world is built from different materials.